Hi Russet, I'm going to read to you the first 3 chapters of the Nowhere Emporium. So you've heard the prologue, which was a little bit about what the Emporium was, and now we're going to read chapter 1 where we meet the main character. Now this book does chop around in time and place, but right now it is present day. These 3 chapters are all set in the present day and in Glasgow. So the first chapter is called Chapter 1, A Chance Encounter. Look out, coming through. Oi! Watch where you're going, wee man. Sorry. Daniel Holmes darted through the Saturday shopping crowds in Glasgow, pushing and twisting and weaving. His lungs burned and his legs ached, but he did not stop. He couldn't stop. Spud Harper and his gang were chasing him, and everyone in the children's home knew that if Spud Harper was after you, you didn't slow down. Daniel wheeled left at a butcher shop, almost slipping on a blood-red puddle. He turned into a narrow street lined with old buildings, housing fashion boutiques, restaurants and coffee shops. Carved stone angels and gargoyles seemed to watch the street from high above. Daniel's head swung right to left. Where next? He wondered how far he was from the bus station. He imagined jumping on a bus headed to the coast where he could stow away on a boat and escape from Glasgow and St. Catherine's. Somewhere with no Spud Harper would be nice. Not crying for your dad? Spud yelled at him from somewhere back among the crowds. You were wailing like a baby in your sleep again last night. The whole home heard you. Daddy, Daddy, don't die, Daddy. Ha, ha. Don't worry, wee man. When we're through with you, you'll have something else to cry about. Spud and his gang were bigger than Daniel and faster and stronger. Sooner or later they'd catch him. He sprinted across the street, jinked into the nearest shop and slammed the heavy door shut. He clutched at his chest and watched through the darkened glass of the door, crouching out of sight. He could hear Spud's gang shouting as they thundered past. Where'd he go? Where is the wee weasel? Must be up here. Daniel's shoulders sagged. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The air was infused with the jumbled perfume of furniture polish and dust, and something like melting chocolate. Then he opened his eyes and for the first time became fully aware of his surroundings. The shop was a cave of wonders. Everywhere he looked, Daniel saw something he wanted to pick up, to hold, and to have as his own. Silver and gold and crystal gleamed and sparkled in the light of a spitting fire. Intricate wooden clocks and mirrors of varying size and splendour covered the walls. Tiny fish flashed like bars of copper in a glass tank. There were porcelain dolls and wooden soldiers, rusted saws, stuffed animals, columns of books as high as the ceiling, jewels that seemed to glow with a silvery light. A stuffed polar bear sat in one corner, eyeing the shop like a watchman. Even particles of dust, caught in a bar of sunlight, seemed to glow like stars. How did you get in here? We're closed. The voice startled Daniel. In a far corner of the room stood a grand desk with feet carved like an eagle's talons. Behind the desk sat a small man in a dusty suit. His wavy brown hair was wild and tangled, falling over his handsome face. On the desk in front of the man lay a battered book. His hand hovered over an open page, clutching a fountain pen. He stared at Daniel with the eyes the colour of thunderclouds. Sorry, said Daniel. Didn't mean to bother you. Someone's chasing me. As he spoke, his eyes were drawn to the book on the desk, which had begun to tremble against the dark grain of the wood, as if there was something on the pages trying to get out. The man in the suit frowned. He glanced from Daniel to the book and back. Then he snapped the book shut, locked it away in his desk, and got up and marched past Daniel to the door. See, he said, pointing to a sign hanging on the door that read closed. Closed. He tried the door handle, opened the door. I could have sworn I locked it. He spun back to face Daniel, staring at him through narrowed eyes. Who's after you? Big boys. From my children's home. The man raised an eyebrow. You're an orphan. Daniel nodded. The fire snapped and cracked. What happened to your parents? Said the man. Daniel thought this was an odd question for a stranger to ask, but he didn't want to be thrown out back onto the street. So he answered. Dad was a fisherman, died at sea. Mum only lasted a couple of years after that. This seemed to satisfy the shopkeeper. And why are these big boys after you, he said. There must be a reason. Daniel folded his arms. Yes, there is a reason. They're goons. Spud and his pals think they run the home. They take things from other kids, important things like reminders of their parents and stuff, and nobody ever stands up to them. But I couldn't take it anymore. I followed them. I found where they keep their stash. I got everyone's stuff back and explained that if the other kids stick around, Spud and his gang can't get to them. Spud didn't like that. The little man in the dusty suit jutted out his bottom lip and nodded, disguising a smile. Ah, bullies, I see. He wandered around from behind his desk. What is your name? Daniel. Daniel Holmes. Well, Daniel Holmes, I know how it lives to live life in the shadow of a bully. We have that in common. Really? I'll tell you what, you can wait in here until you are sure Spud and his gangs are gone. Yes, sir, thank you. It's no trouble, said the man in the suit. Now, if you excuse me, I have business to attend to. He turned and wandered towards a velvet curtain of rich, deep crimson at the back of the shop. As he reached for the curtain, he paused. Daniel, do you have a favourite animal? Animal? Daniel thought for a moment. It's a bit weird, he said, but I like magpies. People say they're the cleverest of the birds. There's a rhyme about them. Ah, said the man in the suit. One for sorrow, two for joy. Aye, that's the one. Very good, said the shopkeeper. He smiled to himself and said, well, I must be off. A fleeting smile crossed the man's face. Oh, I wouldn't be too sure. Oh, I missed a line. See you, said Daniel. Hey, maybe I'll come back and buy something from you one day. A fleeting smile crossed the man's face. Oh, I wouldn't be too sure. Return customers are very rare in this place. And with that, through the curtain, he was gone. Daniel peered out the window, which was tinted sepia, so that the outside world looked like an old photograph. Grey Glasgow rain had begun to fall in fat drops. Puddles were already gathering on the road. Spud Harper and his gang were long gone, but Daniel was keen to have one last look around before he left. He wandered towards a table scattered with metal toy soldiers. He picked two of the soldiers up, imagining that one was himself and the other Spud Harper, and staged a fight between the two. Daniel's soldier was about to throw Spud off the table when something startled him. A soft, fluttering sound. He dropped the toys and stared at the red curtain to the back of the shop. Another flutter. The curtain waved gently. He edged forward, his heart racing. When he was close enough, he reached out a trembling hand and slowly, gently, touched the material. A burst of red velvet, the sound of flapping wings, and two silver birds exploded from behind the curtain. Daniel ducked and spun, and the birds flew across the store and landed on a column of stacked books. They were magpies, but they were no magpies Daniel had ever seen. They were made of brilliant, gleaming silver. Every feather, delicate as a shaving of ice, reflected the flames of the cold fire. The silver magpies fixed him with shining ruby eyes, twitched their heads to one side. How? Whispered Daniel, treading softly towards them, though they did not shy away as he advanced. When he was close enough, he reached out a hand. Are you real? His fingers touched upon the cool silver of one of the magpie's wings. The bird let out an indignant call and flapped away, leading its twin back towards the curtain. But when they reached the rich red velvet, the birds did not fly through. Instead, they exploded with a flash, and a shower of rubies rained down to the shop floor. Daniel's mouth hung open. What's going on in there? Cried the shop owner from behind the curtain. What was that sound? Nothing had better be damaged. Suddenly unsure of what exactly he'd seen or what kind of place he'd stumbled upon, Daniel made for the door. A little bell sang as he dashed out into the rain and down the street. A moment later, the short man in a dusty old suit stepped out from behind the curtain. He stared around the shop, then he leaned over and plucked two of the magpie rubies from the floor. Rolling them between his thumbs and fingers, his hands closed around the stones, and when they opened once more, the magpies were sitting in his palms, brilliant silver, almost glowing in the gloom. The man in the suit released the birds and watched as they circled the shop before settling once again on a column of books. Then he smiled a wide, clever smile and disappeared back through the curtain. So Chapter 2, The Return Customer. Daniel returned to the shop the very next day. He couldn't help himself. On reflection, he felt silly for rushing out in such a panic. Now he'd had time to think. He supposed what he had seen must have been a very clever trick, an illusion and nothing more. But he found himself so desperate to know exactly how the owner of the shop had made the magpie seem so real. He spent breakfast trying not to look at Spud Harper, who made threatening gestures at him across the dining hall for the entire meal. Slipping out during the rush after breakfast was easy, lost in the flow of the crowd. Daniel darted along to the kitchens where the back door was always open to let out the reek of the chef's cooking. The world was bathed in Sunday sunshine. The sky endless blue. Daniel retraced his steps from the previous trip, passing the butcher shop, breathing the smell of sawdust and raw flesh, and found himself back in the gargoyle-lined street. For a moment he was worried that he'd dreamt the whole thing, but then he saw the black bricks glistening in the light of the sun, and a grand arched doorway and a golden sign. The No Way Emporium. The closed sign was still displayed in the door. Daniel stared at it, arguing with himself, knowing that he shouldn't try and enter, but something about the shop was pulling him in. His hands trembled as he reached for the handle. The door was not locked. He pulled it open and felt warmth spilling from the shop. Inside it, it was exactly as he had left it. There was no sign of the owner, no hint of the silver birds. Daniel examined the column of books where the magpies had landed. Then, treading softly, he made his way towards the red velvet curtain to spot on the floor where the birds had fallen and smashed into rubies. The light in the place was dim. He had to drop to his knees to inspect the floor. Not a single ruby anywhere. The velvet curtains flapped, and Daniel found himself staring at a pair of leather grey shoes. He looked up into eyes the colour of angry thunderclouds, eyes that did not leave him, not even for the briefest moment. Silence. The shop owner's brow furrowed. He rubbed at his temples. He closed and opened his mouth several times, but no words escaped. He blinked, turned round and retreated through the curtain. Then he poked his head back into the shop, as if checking Daniel was really there. Eventually he burst through the curtain and stood inches from Daniel, stooped over, so that they were eye to eye. He smelled like pages of old books. "How can I help you?" he said. His voice was calm, but the look in his eyes suggested that a storm was erupting somewhere in his brain. I just wanted another look around. Is that okay?" The man craned his neck so that his face was even closer to Daniel's. He narrowed his eyes and whispered, "You remember this place?" "Yeah, I was only here yesterday." The man grabbed him by the wrist and rushed him over to his desk. "Have a seat," he said, pushing Daniel into the wooden chair, sitting himself on his desk. He pressed the palms of his hands together. "What do you remember?" he said. "Tell me exactly." I remember everything. The books, the mirrors, the clocks, meeting you, the silver magpies." The man held up the finger to quiet Daniel. His eyes were darting about the place. "How is this possible?" he said. "I'm sorry," said Daniel in confusion. "Have I missed something? How is what possible?" The man leapt to his feet. "Which children's home are you from?" he said. "St. Catherine's," said Daniel. "It's only a few streets away." The man nodded. "Have you ever noticed strange things happening around you? Lights flickering, mirrors smashing, that sort of thing?" "No, why?" "No reason," said the man with a casual wave of his hand. Then he grabbed Daniel and pulled him from the chair, ushering him towards the door. "Listen, Daniel Holmes, we're closed, as the sign on the door clearly states, so I think you should be toddling off home. But..." And with that, Daniel was pushed out onto the street, completely stunned by what had happened. On the other side of the glass, the owner stared at him for a moment, and when Daniel blinked, he was gone. Daniel began to trudge back down the street, hand in pockets, aiming kicks at the occasional stone. If he had looked around at the correct moment, he might have noticed the door of the Nowhere Emporium opening a fraction and an ashen hand tossing 2 silver birds into the air. He might also have noticed that these birds flew from rooftop to rooftop, perching on stone angels, watching his every step as he made his way back to St. Catherine's. Chapter 3. Ambushed. The thing about Spud Harper was that he never let anything go. Any time he had a grudge, no matter how small, he'd carry it around for as long as it took to get even. As long as it took. Daniel knew this. Everyone did. He might have escaped Spud once, ducking into the Nowhere Emporium, but he had been looking over his shoulder ever since. Daniel didn't leave St. Catherine's at all over the next few days. Every time he was alone in the corridor or turning a corner in the playground, he expected Spud to jump out at him. It didn't happen. Not that way. Monday went by. Nothing. Then Tuesday. Then Wednesday was the same, and the longer it dragged on, the more it seemed certain Spud's revenge would truly be horrible when it arrived. Thursday. The last Thursday of every month at St. Catherine's was fire drill day. It happened right after lunch. You could set your watch by it. When Daniel's class sat down at their desks after break, their teacher, Mr. Pym, did not even bother telling them to open their textbooks. Sure enough, a few minutes later, the air was split by the shrill of the alarm, and the class filed out, merging in the main corridor with several other classes. Daniel's stomach sank to somewhere around his knee as he felt someone huge appear at his side. Smitty, the biggest boy in Spud's gang, smiled down at him. "Don't say a word, wee man, or I'll knock you out." He grabbed Daniel by the arms where the teachers were focused on getting the kids outside and bundled him across the corridor to the gym hall. Spud was waiting in the centre of the hall. Smitty dragged Daniel towards him and held him in front of Spud, who struck his who stuck his freckled face right in Daniel's. "Thought I forgot about you, pal," he said. "Thought I was going to let you off with what you did." Daniel said nothing. He stared at Spud, hatred burning in his veins. "Here's what's going to happen," said Spud. "You're going to steal back all the stuff it took me so long to get from the other kids. And if you don't, I'm going to smack you once for every single thing you cost me. That's a lot of punches, Daniel." Daniel stared around the gym hall. The door back to the corridor was blocked by another Spud's gang playing lookout. No escape that way. But the back door, the one behind the stage. Daniel brought his foot down as hard as he could on top of Smitty's. He heard the big guy howl in pain, felt the grip of his huge arm soften. Daniel managed to squirm away, taking off towards the back of the hall. "Hey, get back here!" Daniel ran up the stairs to the stage. He ducked through the curtain, the sound of Spud's trainers on boards just behind him, down another set of steps and out onto a narrow corridor. "Not this time, Danny boy," yelled Spud. "You're getting it." Daniel ploughed on, his feet barely touching the floor as he ran to the end of the corridor, burst through a fire exit to the car park at the back of St. Catherine's. Then he was away through the gate to the streets beyond, pushing past office workers who were out making the most of the Glasgow sunshine during their lunch breaks. Daniel glanced over his soldier, kicked into another gear and tore through a pedestrian courtyard between two office buildings, firing out of the other side like a bullet. "Daniel!" Spud stopped. "Stop! You're going to get..." The tail of Spud's sentence was cut off by the blast of a car horn. And Daniel realised in one of those strange instances when time seems to slow down that he'd run out onto a road. He heard the screech of tyres, saw the car coming towards him head on, caught the driver's horrified gaze behind the windscreen. He knew it was too late to stop. Knew he was not fast enough to keep going. There was no doubt in his mind that he was going to die in the street. A flash of silver in the corner of his eye. Someone pressed the play button on the world. Everything screamed back to life. Before the car could hit him, something else did, knocking him sideways. He landed heavily and stared up through blurred eyes at the cloudless sky. He was aware of someone standing over him, a person in a grey suit. Whoever it was, they were talking to him, but the voice was very far away. The only thing Daniel wanted to do was to go to sleep. The world around him was lost to blackness. So, that is the first 3 chapters. So we've met Daniel. And I just want you to think very carefully about Daniel. What do we know about him? Some of the things the author has told us. We know he's an orphan. But some things about his character we can infer. Okay. So we know he took back some of the things Spud had stole. What does that infer about his character? So what I would like you to do in the middle of your page is to draw... Now this is a very brief drawing. You can draw something much better. Daniel. Mine's in red pen. Sorry, I should have thought about this. Maybe I'll turn the light on. Okay. Draw Daniel and arrows around him. So I've written orphan because he's an orphan. Okay. But everything you know about Daniel right around him in the middle of your page. So some of those things you know because the author has stated it. Some of those things you'll be able to infer, okay? If you want to go back and listen to what I've read to you and pause and stop it, go ahead. So that's the first thing I'd like you to do, is to kind of do a character profile of Daniel. The second thing I would like you to do is I've written out some of the description of the Emporium when Daniel first goes into it. I'd like you to read through that, and I would like you to come up with your own description of what that shop might look like to you. So imagine you're the person walking into the Emporium. You might have been to an antique shop, or sometimes even charity shops. Just take my breath away, just all the things there. And I want you to write your own description. I'd love you to use the most amazing language. We've talked about up-leveling our language before. So I'd like you to really think about the language and the vocabulary. How can you describe things, okay? You might want to use similes or metaphors. And you might want to do show, don't tell for the reader. And I'd like you to write a description of yourself walking into the Emporium. It can be however you imagine it, but I'm sure there'll be so many things to look at, and the smells, and just so many fascinating things that take your breath away. I've written all of this on the sheet outlining the work you'd like you to do this week. So you can just remind yourself by looking on there.